Welcome back to Thompson's Coins, where today we're taking a look at some of the cool things that came through the shop this week. This week, like many others before it, has been fascinating to be behind the counter of the shop. We've had some great coins come through, and I'm excited to show you some of those today. Let's start off the session with a gold sovereign. Now, this isn't just any sovereign. This was one that was actually won in a competition. And anyone that knows me or has watched these videos for a while knows that I love a good story, and this is precisely that. So this was back in 1987. This lady was a student at the Catholic University, and it was just near Chadstone Shopping Centre. For anyone that's international or interstate, Chadstone Shopping Centre is an incredibly large shopping centre in Melbourne, and this lovely young lady used to have her lunch breaks over there, so she would go into the food court because she would have extended breaks between classes. And on this particular day, she went over there for her break. She was having lunch, and she noticed that there was a bit of excitement happening at the other end of the food court, and there was one of those large displays on a stage with the big rotating wheel. You'd spin the wheel, you'd pick the number, and hopefully your number would come up. This lady was selected to go up and spin the wheel, and she spun it, she'd picked a number, and lo and behold, her number came up. So as you can imagine, being a uni student, she was very excited about the prospect of getting something for nothing, and they said, you can have this here gold sovereign, at the time valued at a whopping $200, or she was given the option of selecting the mystery box. Now, as any good competition goes, the mystery box, they said, could be anything. It could be something of very little value, or it could be the keys to a brand new car. And this lady was very clever. She said that her dad had always told her not to gamble, and when things were good, you can take the money off the table. So she selected the sovereign. She was very excited to be the winner of this particular gold coin, and they actually opened up the mystery box on the stage, and it had a pencil and an eraser in it. So safe to say, she made a very good decision and was delighted to come into the store and receive a significantly higher sum than $200 for her gold sovereign. Another fun fact about this particular coin is it was struck in 1923 at the Melbourne Mint. This is a slightly scarcer date in terms of the sovereign series. And another interesting thing to note that was going on in the Melbourne Mint in 1923 was a production of the iconic 1923 halfpenny. For those of you that are unfamiliar with how to identify where a sovereign was produced, they often feature a mint mark. This can be located just above the date and just beneath the St. George and the Dragon design. In this instance, we have the letter M, which confirms that this particular sovereign was struck at the Melbourne Mint. There were 3 mints in Australia that produced sovereigns over the years. We had Sydney Mint, which was the first. That series begins in 1855. Then we had Melbourne, who began striking sovereigns dated in 1872. Then we have the Perth Mint, which is actually still operational today, which began producing sovereigns in the year 1899 and still produces modern collector sovereigns today. Flipping over to the obverse, also known as the head side of the sovereign, we have a portrait here of King George V. So I think as far as lunch breaks go for university students, that's probably one of the more productive ones that I've heard of in recent times. Next up, we have a really cool set. This was a Norse gods set. This was produced by B.H. Mayer in Germany, and the vast majority of these, the total production run of the set was only 1,000, and I think somewhere in the order of 400 to 500 were snapped up by the Royal Canadian Mint for distribution. So it's really uncommon to see these sets, and I actually distinctly recall in 2015 being really interested in a set like this, but it was a little beyond my means as a young collector at the time with a really limited budget. So this is one of those things for me which feels like it's come full circle, and it's nice to finally have one of these that I can now display in the store and have conversations with people about. So the set features 9 different 2-ounce silver antiqued coins, each depicting a various Norse god on there. So you've got everyone represented here, from Loki to Odin to Thor, Tyr, Frigg. The whole gang's here presented in a very nice presentation box. And like I say, there were only 1,000 produced. The vast majority ended up in the Canadian collector's market. So it's really cool to be able to see one of these and get to display it in the store. And now, keeping along the theme of things that are really nice to display and have a bit of an interesting backstory, You may not know this, but there was a set of sterling silver medallions which was produced by the designer Stuart Devlin. For anyone unfamiliar, Stuart Devlin was the designer of all of Australia's decimal coinage. So all of those wonderful Australian animals that you see represented on our 5 cent, 10 cent, 20 cent pieces and so on, they were all designed by Stuart Devlin, as were all of the bird designs in this particular presentation set. Not only that, there were only 377 of these produced. And I'm going to go out on a limb and suggest that given the increase in silver price from 1978 till today, 377 of these sets do not exist anymore. I imagine there are far fewer than that available on the market. Something else that's nice about a set like this is it comes with an accompanying booklet which has information, detailed information on every single bird represented here. The inside cover also has a certificate of authenticity from the Royal Australasian Ornithologists Union, signed by Norman Wetenhall, who was the president in 1978 when these sets were produced. Understandably, given that there are 50 different birds depicted here, you get a really broad cross-section of Australian native birds here. So it's a really, really beautiful set. And they were also struck in sterling silver. So each of the medallions here is 18 grams. So I'll crunch the numbers for you so you can understand in terms of the actual silver value. I'll explain how something like that is calculated on a set like this. So when people say, oh, there's X amount of silver in this particular set, the way that's calculated is as follows. So each medallion here weighs 18 grams. You multiply that figure by 0.925. So 0.925 relates to the 92.5% silver purity of each of these medallions. So you multiply the gross weight, so the total weight of the item, by the purity, which gives us 16.65. You then multiply that by 50, which is how many medallions are in the set, which gives you a total of 832.5 grams of silver. If you want to know how many ounces that is, you divide that figure by 31.103, which is 1 troy ounce. That's another interesting distinction to make if you're not familiar with precious metals at all. A lot of people say you need 28 grams to equate to 1 ounce. That's actually untrue when we're talking about precious metals. It is a troy ounce, which is 31.103 grams, which gives you a total in this instance of 26.76 ounces of silver in this particular set. So not an insignificant amount of precious metals, but I would argue a set like this, when only 377 were originally produced, and given the ties to Stuart Devlin, who's a bit of a rock star in the coin design world of Australia, a set like this would be worth quite a bit more than just the raw silver value. Moving on, in keeping with the distinctly Australian theme that we're starting to build up here, we've had 6 of the Kangaroo at Sunset designs come through the door. This is a 1/5 ounce gold proof coin, and it is an absolutely stunning design. This is something that has been running since 2007, and I believe the series concluded in 2019. This was one of the early examples of a ballot coin being done by the Royal Australian Mint. So you had to submit your name with the hopes that you would get plucked out and receive the opportunity to purchase one of these coins. Something that's nice about it as well is, and I guess this goes both ways, so some people would view this as a positive, some as a negative. The design remained the same throughout the entirety of the series. But when you've got a design like this, I think it makes total sense to keep it the same, because I can see any alterations to this design being met with some critical feedback. I think it's really, really nice, and it sort of gives you, despite being a small planchet, that shadow that the Kangaroo casts gives you a bit of a sense of the vastness of the Australian desert. And if you've ever seen kangaroos out in the desert, it really is a sight to behold and something quite special. And I think these coins do a great job of depicting that. Also, being 1/5 of an ounce of gold, once again, it's not an insignificant amount of precious metal in the coin as well. Now, the last thing I'll highlight before this video goes on for an hour, and I won't stop. I've got a few other things that I want to talk about, but I try to make these videos digestible, and I don't want to overwhelm you with content, because I also must confess, this week, there has been a lot of interesting collections coming over the counter, and there are some mornings where I walk in the door and I think, where am I going to start with this? And you just need to take it bit by bit, almost like your collecting journey, right? It can become a little overwhelming at times, but you just need to process these things piece by piece and work your way through it. And in that sense, I've had to take my own advice on a couple of mornings this week when I walk into the store and I think, there's a lot to be done. So I'm not actually complaining. It's more just an acknowledgement that this industry can become very overwhelming at times with all sorts of interesting things coming over the counter. In addition to that, there are a lot of interesting coins being released by the likes of the Perth Mint and some international things coming through as well. We've just had another delivery from the Royal Canadian Mint. There's some beautiful coins in that, but perhaps I'll highlight that in another video. They will also be in the new arrivals section, along with all of these items that we're looking at now. But the last thing that we'll take a look at today is we also received 7 of the 8 of the original Opal Australian Animals series. So this was a series that began in 2012, and this was, I believe, the first time the Perth Mint had worked with actual opal in the coin design. So this is distinctly different, in my opinion, from the Treasures of Australia series, which was a lovely series where each coin featured a little locket, and it had things like opals, gold, mother of pearl, different things that you can get in Australia, but it was featured in a locket in its raw form. This was a really clever and innovative design choice by the Perth Mint, in which you see actual opal in the design, so the animal is depicted in opal. And I was having a lovely conversation with Alicia, one of the wonderful designers from the Perth Mint, about this, because she's designed a couple of these opal coins over the years, and she was commenting on how lovely it is that you get such a broad range of styles when you look at opals, because obviously when you're talking about a natural element, you can't just get consistency. So each coin is actually distinctly unique in that sense. And you can get some really beautiful examples of the cross sections of the opal in there. And when it catches the light, you'll see what I mean in some of the close-up footage now. When it catches the light, these coins have a really, really interesting appearance. And this is the type of thing that I think makes for a beautiful display piece. If you have the capacity to have this at your home, in an office or something like that, out on display, I think coins like these are a really interesting conversation piece and a real centerpiece for a collector that likes Australian animals and something that's a little unique. And we've also certainly seen a significant increase in demand for these opal coins in the last couple of years. I'll never forget when I was managing a coin store. This was when the very first Great Southern Land came out. This was an Australian map depicted in opal, and it sat on the shelf for weeks and weeks and weeks, and it was one of those things that I thought, oh, this is a really interesting coin, this is a really beautiful design, but it's just not popular at all. And again, much like the planetary set, years went by and then the collectors got hold of it and the price went through the roof, and they're now incredibly hard to get your hands on. But I think that just about does it for this video. You've seen a sovereign that was won as a lucky prize at a shopping centre in the 1980s, a Norse god set from Germany, the Birds of Australia set. This was actually produced by Franklin Mint over in the US, but designed by Stuart Devlin. The Kangaroo at Sunset gold coins, and then a number of beautiful opal coins. So that's just a small segment of what came through the shop this week. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you enjoy collecting, the greatest hobby in the world, we're here at Shop 8 in the Boronia Mall, which is Shop 850 Dorset Square in Boronia. We're open from 10 till 4, Tuesday to Friday, and we're also here on Saturdays from 10 till 3. Consider subscribing to the channel if you enjoy this type of content. I also try and keep you up to date with the latest happenings in the coin world, which also absolutely reminds me, next week I will be in Hobart in Tasmania. So we're traveling down south to my favourite state of Australia for the first, I think this must be the first time in, I'm just going to ballpark 10 to 15 years that the Money Expo has gone down to Tasmania. So this is something that I'm really excited about. If you happen to be a Tasmanian local, it will be at the Rest Point Casino in the Derwent Room. It's going to be on the 5th and 6th, which is the Saturday and Sunday, the 5th and 6th of September. So if you happen to be in the neighbourhood, come on down, say hello. I'd love to meet any of you in person, but for anyone that can't make it, hopefully I'll get some footage because I'm really looking forward to getting down to Tassie. It's a beautiful state and I always enjoy spending time down there. Alrighty, that's it for now. Thank you very much for watching and we look forward to seeing you soon.